Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke, and today's guest is Elizabeth Stauder. She is a post-trauma growth coach, somatic alchemist, and transformation doula. Her work bridges the scientific and the mystical by integrating somatic trauma reprocessing, neuroscience, shamanic ritual work, and energy medicine. In this episode, we'll discuss how to restore balance on Earth now to wake up from the Matrix. Elizabeth, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So, to wake up from the Matrix is going to be a good one. So let's start with somatic alchemy. I believe that is an alternative, or should we say unique approach to psychotherapy, isn't it?
It's a little more complicated. It's actually a term that I came up with myself. Somatic just means of the body, so it means it's more inclusive than just mental and cognitive processes. So it's much more right brain and left brain sync versus just left brain top-down mental patterning. And then alchemy, I like that word a lot because this is like an ancient science that has been so important for so long and that people understood in mystery schools and for many, many years. It's really that transmutation process of lead to gold, but it doesn't always necessarily mean of a metal, right? It could be anything. And so the reason I like that term is because it really means instead of bypassing our healing, we're actually going in, there's no fear to approach any symptom, whether it's showing up on the spiritual dimension, the physical dimension, the emotional dimension, the cognitive dimension. And we're learning how to transmute that and transform it into a higher, more evolved, more purified substance. Somatic just means doing this directly through the body and body symptomology, which was my experience in healing myself.
Does this have something to do with dreaming or otherwise working with dreams as well?
Yeah, it very much can. So even though somatic alchemy is something I do when I'm awake and I do it in my session work, it's tapping into a similar state, like brain state in the mind. So I like to think of it as like a dreamtime consciousness, which you can also enter with a conscious choice and an agency versus necessarily doing it while you're asleep. But it is very related to dreamtime work. Now that I'm thinking back on all of my experiences with dream work growing up, long before I even became a somatic practitioner, one of the first things that shifted was when I realized I could wake from a dream, still be in that consciousness and not wake up all the way, and stay sort of in that state in between, and then apply my conscious will to use my agency and my sovereignty to play with the blueprint that the dream was showing me. So like operating in that place where you're touching into the subconscious just enough to like get under the hood into that blueprint of the psyche, but you can actually exert some conscious will and choice in that place, a little bit of playing in the in between.
It actually sounds a lot like lucid dreaming, or are those states pretty much the same thing?
Yeah, very similar. Yeah.
So speaking of dreams, what if you're in a dream that really is just so chaotic, it defies logic? Are you still able to get under the hood, as you just mentioned, and try to understand what the mechanics or what the symbols mean?
Absolutely. And this is part of why I have found the somatic approach to be so important, because it doesn't require that something makes logical sense first in order to get in there and do the work. It's really more of like a bottom-up approach. So even when I'm working with someone, for example, or with myself in a deep meditation or hypnosis state, I'm more trained in tracking what's the organizing direction that's going to lead this to coherence. And the cool thing is we don't actually have to do that or make that happen. There's always some kind of clue or indicator in the dream or in the state that's emerging or in the body sensation, whatever area that we're working in. A huge part of my learning was to get over this idea of it's a negative spirit versus a positive spirit, or a negative dream or nightmare versus a positive dream or nightmare, or a chaotic dream versus one that makes sense or is logical.
Dreams in general are very important. Like you said, you're mentioning something about the dreamtime state. When we have dreams where there's no logic and everything seems just jumbled about, and then you wake up and think, what was that all about? Is there a way to actually make some sense of it? Or is that something you should just disregard completely, as opposed to those dreams where, let's say, one of your friends or family who passed away, you were actually able to talk to them and everything made perfect sense?
Yeah, I love this question because it gets into this larger nature of reality as I've learned it. It's much more like a rhythmicity between two states of duality, right? And this is what I love about how I've learned through neuroscience, that our bodies and our minds operate this way, but so does all reality, right? Like the zeros and the ones. And so sometimes a dream might be in that sort of upward motion of the rhythm where the point is to get clarity and focus and like break through a chaotic situation and bring some more clarity. Sometimes the purpose of the dream is more on what would be the downshift of that rhythm, which is to digest and metabolize something that it's just been through. Think about it like when you eat a meal, that's different than when you're digesting a meal and it's all messy inside of your stomach. Psychic information is similar, right? And there are times where in order to make the next sort of leap in consciousness or growth or clarity, we first have to break apart all of the components that we have been. This is part of identity evolution too, and karmic healing. Anytime you break through a pattern, first you have to dissolve the pattern that you're currently living in. So it actually needs to get chaotic and messy instead of make sense. The space that opens up when that breaks down is what allows a greater pattern to emerge. So a more evolved pattern to emerge and evolve reality to the next level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I'm sure that's a very common question. Why do some dreams make sense and some have no logic at all? And while we're on the subject of dreams, shamanic initiation dreams, which you've had, how does that tie into your practice?
Oh, immensely. Yeah. I think in the most simple way that it ties into my practice is that it's given me a sense of my purpose in the larger universal and cosmic sense. One, it keeps me going and going further and further in the work that I'm here to do in the world. But secondly, it also helps me to hold space in a way that's like psychically safe and protected, because so much of my learning has been about how to not do this work from a place of it's just little human Elizabeth doing it, but it's little human Elizabeth learning how to be a conduit for something greater. And that is self-protective because it means that something that's more evolved than myself can guide the work that we're doing. It's also helped me through my own healing journey, which I've mentioned was quite intense, and having that mindset of knowing, oh, this is an initiation because I'm here to learn how to go through something really hard and then reverse that and undo that and heal myself. It really fortified me instead of taking me to a place where I might give up and check out of the planet.
Oh, we definitely don't want that. Okay, so another question I had about shamanism is that you mentioned something called the shaman's sickness. These initiation dreams, that was part and parcel of your healing, or was it actually separate?
Yeah, definitely. One of the first ones I remember was at age 16, and that was well before I had any health issues that I was aware of. But it was one of those dreams that was so lucid that I still remember it. It's been over 20 years. It's been a while. But it was a theme that came back again and again, and actually it was the archetype of the great snake, which is one of the shamanic messengers, right? In the sort of traditional indigenous shamanic world, there are 3 layers. I guess it depends on what tradition you're looking at, but there's usually some guardian that protects each of the 3 worlds, and the lower world is often guarded by the great snake energy, which also correlates with the kundalini energy that wakes up in the spine when we're going through an awakening process that's embodied, which has definitely been my experience. And I think that's why somatic alchemy has been so important, is learning how to do that in a way that doesn't freak out the body and the nervous system too much. But in short, this dream was a visitation by the great snake. This might help explain a little bit your question about the chaos and the logic or the clarity too, because in that moment that I had the dream, it seemed completely chaotic. Essentially, I was bitten by a snake, it entered my body and spread poison throughout my whole body, and I basically passed out in the dream. It was basically what is sometimes termed in shamanic language a dismemberment dream, where you're completely taken apart. And you would think, oh, that's a negative dream. Like, I was killed, right?
But it isn't.
Exactly. To me, it was the beginning of learning that it's actually safe to die, to go through a death process, because life and reality, when it's evolving, is regenerative. And so if you can trust going into a death experience, the gift you'll get on the other side is that you'll learn how to be remade again, even better. So that's the alchemy piece, like the lead to gold. You need to be able to go through that death portal, surrender through it, and be reorganized on the other side by something greater.
What you just mentioned brings to mind the reincarnation cycle. You have to go through it, and you have to go to the in-between space where you go through your lessons, you assign yourself a task or several, and then go through the cycle all over again in order to learn. 3 worlds. You mentioned one was a lower world. Is there some kind of relationship to the spiritual realm where there's different levels, like a lower level and so forth?
Yeah, and I think lots of different systems have different components, but like things that are similar overlaps. And I think that's what's so fascinating about the nature of reality, is that throughout history, different systems have mapped it, and you can follow the fact that they're tuning into the same energetic reality, even if they name it differently. So like, for example, even also like the Kabbalah or like the Tree of Life is also something that does this. The chakra system does this, but the 3 worlds are a simplified version, yes, of the lower world, which basically represents the subconscious. In some ways, you could say, if you want to think about it in more scientific terms, the middle world, which is our waking world, our waking state of consciousness. So that would be like the brain state we're having a conversation in, like deciding what to order for dinner or whatever.
Important things, obviously.
Very important. Without that, we can't function as human beings. So it's very important. And then the upper world would be like what some people might call heaven or the afterlife, but it is that sort of higher consciousness state of union and understanding where you have that bird's eye perspective on everything else.
So what is the shaman sickness, and why is it relevant today?
Yeah, it is that initiatory sickness. So it is that idea, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a sickness, although it often has been, especially if a shaman is here to actually learn about medicine and healing. It could be another kind of a crisis. Like there's the classic one of like being struck by lightning, for example. But the idea is that usually at a young age, and, you know, this is changing because as we go through different eras on Earth, like there's different ways that this shows up. But traditionally it was like maybe a young person would get struck by lightning or get struck with an illness that took them to the brink of death. And the reason was because they were destined to be someone who would learn how to overcome such an intense circumstance. And I think the reason this is so important and key for our time, whether or not someone identifies as a shaman or someone who's here to help people learn how to heal, is because it really breaks that paradigm on its head that just bad things just happen to people in a way that is not part of a larger program. And there's older systems of medicine who believe this in more subtle ways too, like for example anthroposophy or old like Eastern medicine systems where they'll say like even sickness has a purpose. It's not just a punishment or a curse. It's something that's coming in to attack, and you could say the same thing about negative energies or entities. It's coming in to attack so that you can see the places where there is a weakness so that you can strengthen those places. So if you look at it in that way, shaman sickness is like an initiation that's saying, I'm going to cripple you so that you can learn that you have the power to undo that and you're not actually a victim in this universe. That's
almost like a purification ritual, and a very interesting take on negative entities, which I've heard a variety of things, but it's happening for a reason. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's happening so we can be aware of a weak point, a weak spot.
I would say that same thing with negative energies and like mental or emotional concepts too, right? So if you keep attracting like a negative kind of relationship into your life or having an experience like that, it's ultimately empowering because you can ask the question, what part of my energy body is a match for that, or is like attracting or magnetizing that, showing you your weak point, you could say, so that you can then do the alchemical work of transforming that so it no longer then you have the opposite effect, and that now just bounces off you in the opposite direction.
Let's talk about your role as a transformation doula. Now, I believe that is a form of mediumship, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't tend to use that word, but I do believe it is. And I think the only reason I don't use the word is because a huge part of my learning about channeling energy has been a little bit of what I described, that I had to change my relationship. I think I was going through my next lesson as a healer in my relationship with spiritual guides and guidance, and that it's meant to be, I would not just tell someone, like, this is what your guides are telling me about you. Because my interest, at least for me personally as a soul, is learning how to help someone else access that for themselves, access their own channel. So that's why I like to use the word doula, because a doula is someone who traditionally would help a mom going through childbirth. And what they're doing is they're supporting them, making sure that they're feeling emotionally and physically taken care of, they're well fed and nourished and have all the things they need. So I would rather be the person that's helping somebody learn how to do that for their own channel instead of doing it for them. Like, the doula can't birth the baby for the mom, but she can give the mom everything the mom needs to go through that powerful portal of giving birth, right?
So you're more of a facilitator rather than someone that positions herself as a medium who does readings, but it's still another tool in your tool belt.
I would say it has an even stronger effect ultimately, because the way that it looks is that myself and the other person, we open a channel together. I'm supporting that with my understanding of how to do that. And so then we're both listening. Sometimes I do find myself being the one doing more of the direct channeling because someone needs that. But my goal is to help them get into a situation where they don't feel dependent on me to do that, and they start to find their own voice. And so we're listening together and sort of reflecting to them until they find that sovereignty for themselves. Because that's a core part of my mission, is to help people find their sovereignty and their intuition. It's such a part, I think, of the waking up that we're doing as a collective right now.
We hear a lot of people talking about intuition, ascension, and moving into the Aquarian age. Do you think that we're going to see a shift of teaching people how to do this for themselves rather than going to the medium whenever you have a question, which I think was a trend in years past? Does that make sense?
Yes, I do, absolutely. And I think that's part of our spiritual maturation process. If you think about it, when a child is younger, they do need their parent to tie their shoes or make their meals. But as they get older, it becomes more supportive to teach them to do those things for themselves and support them through learning. And so it's very similar, I think, on Earth, that we're learning that with our spiritual abilities to become less in our infancy and more in our growing up years. Yeah.
You're obviously no stranger to the mystical, or what some people call the unseen realms. What was your introduction, like your first experience?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I can't even remember the first experience because it's been such a core part of my life for as long as I can remember. Just like having moments of unity with like that unified field of consciousness and the universe. And as soon as I could remember my dreams, I was remembering my dreams. And I was always very hypersensitive, very aware. And the hard thing was not knowing how I belonged. And I definitely did suppress a lot of it.
Most people do that. They suppress it until they get older and they think, oh, that's not really such a terrible thing, especially since more and more people are coming out of the spiritual closet. I wouldn't say it's completely normalized, but it's heading in that direction where there's less shame about it, I think.
Yes, the more of us do it, the easier it gets.
So you mentioned spirit guides a few moments ago. Do you remember any early experiences where you finally figure out what they were?
When I was really young, I didn't question it. And then I went through a period in childhood where I was like, this is probably just my imagination. And then later, as I got older, probably in my 20s, which is when I actually started finding and reconnecting with other people on the path who validated my experience, that's when I started noticing that things would not just be in my imaginative channel, but they would also be reflected in the world outside. And I recognized that those worlds were not separate, but that there was communication that was seemingly coming from just the imagination was also being reflected in the world out here, which is something that was very obvious to me when I was healing from illness, because I would have experiences where, for example, I would be in a meditation and get a piece of information and be like, okay, I don't know, but okay. And then have confirmation like within a day or a few days, like, for example, someone that I had show up in my meditation that I hadn't thought of for a long time, and getting an email from them like the next day. And so tapping into sort of a more just psychic space, but then having something in the outside world follow up and through to show me that what I was tapping into was not delusional.
That would be an evidential piece of information. That reminds me of, by the way, you do ancestral lineage work. Can you give us an example of how that works?
Oh my gosh, this is a good follow-up to the last question too, because my experience has been, you don't always logically understand why you're getting the guidance you're getting, but if you follow it, wow, okay, now I see why. And maybe that's part of the learning journey. I think our guides don't give us more than the one step we need in order to go forward. And so, for example, in my case, I was given guidance when I was so sick that I was still not entirely bedbound, but it was just a really, really big deal for me to do something like travel. I was given guidance to go travel to Los Angeles and stay with my aunt. And I didn't really know her very well, but everything was lining up super easy and it was going to be very stressful for my body. But I was like, okay, I'm doing this. When I got there, I stayed in her guest room and there was an image on the wall in the guest room. It was a photograph of my grandmother, so her mom and her younger sister and her other younger sister from when they were very little, a black and white picture. The youngest one was her youngest sister who actually died in the ice at age 4. And I have her name. So when I was born, my mom didn't plan this, but I was literally in the birth canal and she got this piece of information. Oh, I'm supposed to name her the same name as my mother's youngest sister. And so it was named after her. And I'm in the room with that photograph and my symptoms got pretty bad like that first day that I was visiting. And I just was like, I'm going to go with this. I'm going to like go into a somatic alchemy meditation and just ask for the spirit of my grandmother's little sister to show up. And sure enough, basically what I experienced was my body processing whatever it was that her body went through when she was 4 years old. And so I felt almost as if these like cold shards of ice were like that were trapped in my viscera were like moving out, rippling out through my body. It was warm, like air. The temperature was warm, and I was like trying to warm up in my aunt's hot tub. But I was so aware that this was an energetic thing going on because my skin was not cold. The air was warm, but there was this cold ice that was just moving out through my body. And after that experience, certain symptoms that I'd been carrying in my body were completely gone. And so that's just one example of how we can have some of the things we're carrying not just be a personal, but a lineage or family process that was never dealt with or digested or metabolized. And it can really open up our capacity of what we're healing to include ancestor work, to include family work. And what's so powerful about it is that also gave me a better, like a new relationship with my aunt that I never had. My relationship with my mom improved after that too. And certain things that she'd been holding back, she was able to feel more cleanly. And it's like, I don't know how that was connected, but something was connected there. And then I've noticed that some of the most profound healing sessions I've had with clients, they've also had ancestors unexpectedly. Sometimes ones that they knew, like, oh, that was my great-grandfather. But sometimes it was either a past life or maybe an ancestor that was so old that they couldn't have named them. And it was like, oh, there's like a New Zealander in the room. I don't know why, but they're here.
So the ancestors come into the session, literally.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a very interesting example with your great aunt, right? Your grandmother's youngest sister. It sounds like a combination of mediumship and a past life because it seems like you experienced what she experienced, which is something a past life exploration can do.
Absolutely. And I think that when we enter these realms, we can get into a place that's a little bit outside of time. It's like going into deep time and space. So I know we've mentioned the Matrix a couple times, but I think it's relevant here because entering these states also kind of gets you out of that like linear time a bit into this more what science might call neuroplastic or quantum physics might call the quantum, but we're really just talking about that field of consciousness that is non-linear. And at that point, it doesn't even matter if it's a family member, if it's a past life, if it's someone that was never in your family, but your psyche is connected to them. And I believe this because of how incredible my own healing experience was, and like the change in the cells and the DNA and the recoding. There's access to the whole archive of existence inside our blueprint, like in our DNA human blueprint. It's like at some point it doesn't matter where it fits, if it's like direct family or past life or whatnot. You're entering a place in which the world is interdependent and all things are connected anyway. Like with the shaman sickness, if this is the thing that's showing up, it's an initiation. It's the thing you're meant to heal. It's the thing you're meant to learn and understand. So I, at this point, don't even question it. This is what's showing up, and I know I have access to everything. So what do I need to learn here?
Working on the things that seem like an intrusion or a sickness or some kind of debilitating condition, that's going to help us basically exit the matrix, or is it more complicated than that?
That's such a great question, because I think even the way that's framed is starting to get to the other side of the issue, which is the matrix isn't something really we need to escape. As I see it, it's an old pattern. It is one of those patterns that is looking to be transformed and transmuted. The way of transmutation, I think, is much more steady and sustainable than the way of what you might call bypassing, which is like just get somewhere else, right? It's actually more like, remember, we already are somewhere else. We are somewhere bigger. And the matrix, what it has done, it has made our world small. It's made us forget that. And so the best way to sort of escape the matrix is actually to be so in touch with that greater reality that the matrix kind of just has no power anymore. It literally falls away. It is like a snake shedding its skin. It's not something we need to fight against. It's just something that doesn't hold water anymore when you're tapped into that greater consciousness that's so much more vast and whole than the matrix is.
I'll share with you what seems to be the consensus about the matrix. This comes from intuitives that had experience with ETs and other non-human entities, creatures, and so forth. It seems to be this: if we raise our vibration to a certain point, some of the ETs that are trying to keep us trapped in the matrix can no longer exist in that world, and they have to leave.
Yes. It's exactly the same with healing, like parasites, for example, in the body. And what I love about the regenerative approach and the holistic approach is, so long as there is a weakness in the body, there is actually a need. It just is showing where there is something that needs to be healed. And so to get back to your question about why I think this healing is the answer to not escaping, but maybe shedding or getting beyond the matrix, the same thing would happen when you're healing a parasite in the body. There are moments where it's appropriate to target them and clean them out. But first, what you actually want to do is make the tissues of the body so healthy that there isn't anything for them to feed on. And then basically they unattach themselves and they just clear out. And so I see it like that, but I'm just adding another layer onto the picture, which is, yes, flush out the parasites, but also there's a way to do it that's easy. And this is from my understanding of working with the nervous system. It's healthy to come into a response of wanting to fight against something when you've been a victim. But at some point, if you keep staying in fighting energy, you are going to burn out. And so if you can then use that fighting energy to actually access that greater frequency, to shoot yourself into a greater frequency state, that more nourished, soul nourished, this is where I bring the soul back in, because we are malnourished from a spiritual perspective.
And have been for the past 2,000 years, am I right?
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with soul loss?
From sort of a trauma perspective, we are designed to be held in an interdependent field of harmonics and coherence and belonging. And if we've gone for several generations without remembering what that feels like, we start to starve. I call that soul loss. It's literally like pieces of your soul are caught in the past or caught in other dimensions or caught in other relationships. And you're trying to function and go through life with like maybe only a little bit of that on board, and you're functioning well enough, but it's a struggle in some ways, and you come up against a lot of dead ends and stuff. And so instead of focusing so much on the parasites or the negativities or the matrix influence, which I think wants us to focus on that, I think that's part of how it operates, right, is to like keep us distracted, like over here and over there, and get mad about this and get upset about that. There's a reactivity that keeps us in the game of the matrix.
These ETs feed on the negative energy. Like you say, they're basically parasites.
They're parasitic. Yeah.
So when we talk about soul loss, I think that goes back to the principle of remembering who we are and who we were thousands of years ago. And then to connect that to waking up for the matrix is essentially remembering what we were designed to be at the very beginning.
Yeah, and my experience is that calling back the parts of our soul that have gotten lost, it accelerates that process. So yes, it brings that memory back. Every time that I have called back a part of my soul, something else comes online, like more clarity or more memory or more knowledge of how to operate in a way that I didn't before. Gifts become enhanced. And so at least that's what I'm seeing, is the more that we can bring the soul back, the more we will no longer be a feeding ground for what you might call parasitic energies in whatever form that is. And also I would even say that the parasites themselves are confused, and at some point we do them a favor by not becoming any more of a feeding ground for that energy.
Your clinical training is a neuroscience-based trauma reprocessing, which you call organic intelligence. How does that tie into this whole question or the challenge of waking up from the matrix?
Yeah, organic intelligence is the name of the official organization, the training that I did. It's a clinical training that includes the somatic aspect, which I've shared, along with the imagery work, the hypnosis, mindfulness, and cognitive and emotional processing. And so essentially what it does is provides a toolkit for breaking patterns, breaking karmic patterns, ancestral patterns, health patterns, whatever the pattern is that you're looking to transmute. I use the tools of this modality to then channel when I'm with somebody, helping then to sort of get into and undo the layers of that karmic knot that are wound up. So it's starting to like loosen the knots of that, getting into the neuroplastic state. And then we can use through all those different channels, bringing new information in, kind of like doing the Dreamwork, but doing it in live and in real time.
I do believe the example you gave us before of your great aunt, your grandmother's younger sister, that was an example of organic intelligence in play. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, combined with a lot of things. And I would say one of the things I'm really grateful for that training and clinical modality about is that it taught me about thresholds, which means it's not just the content of your healing that's important. It's the dose and the pace at which you unwind or you wake up or you bring a process to light, right? And so a lot of things in the world of healing will be like cathartic, but they almost open up a process too much too quick, and someone can freak out and go back into their state of consciousness or their previous frequency. So it can fail to actually up-level their life to a new frequency. And what I appreciate about this training, it helps you track how much can the nervous system handle at a time of waking up and activating a process. Then how does it digest it so that you can actually live, we talked about that middle world, which is so important. It's like having human experiences and knowing your name and calling the doctor and all that stuff. Can you then bring that new level of awakeness and frequency and all the new things that have turned on into this middle world and have your life not fall apart, but actually become more stable and more authentic and more clear and more empowered, and then go back in there and open up a little bit more. So what I'm grateful to that training for is also really showing me how to do this sustainably, how to wake up in a way that doesn't take you off the deep end into a place where, and not that sometimes that's important. If you need to have a shaman sickness or crisis, that's important, that's fine. But there's a way of working with these things where you do it deliberately and it's more sustainable over time. And it doesn't have to like completely interrupt your life.
So I take it that process, your clinical training, can work hand in hand with something like ancestral lineage work.
Yeah, the training is more of the approach, and then you can bring whatever modality you want to it. So I bring my ancestral healing work, I bring my dream work, I bring all this other stuff to it. And it happens, and what's so cool is you can watch, my training is in like observing the other person's body and nervous system and energy. So I can see how well they're actually digesting what we're doing. And I can pause when they need a moment, or I can bring their attention over here when it's like, oh, this is the missing piece. Like you've got this and this and you need this. And we're just putting it together. I almost think of it as like doing nervous system surgery.
There's shamans in South America that do just that. They call it a psychic surgery.
Yeah, that's it.
That's what it is.
That's exactly what it is. And that's what I do. Yeah, I'm a psychic surgeon. That's exactly what I am.
Your work involves lots of different moving parts. I do think that the dream work is going to be increasingly important in doing this work going forward. I think we've only scratched the surface of what dreams can really tell us.
It gets simpler the more you do it, and that's what I've found. It has taken me a while to get to where I am now. But one thing that helped me, I think I was listening to a podcast on Animism, The Emerald. There's an episode where he talks about the history of Animism and says this recent period of history in which we have not been aware of animism, meaning we have thought we are disconnected from the consciousness of everything else, is so tiny. It's like 1% of 1% of all time in the history of Earth. And so when you remember that this Dreamtime consciousness, which is not just when you're asleep, but it's that state of being able to psychically tune in to that all animate consciousness, like that is actually something that was a natural thing for humans. There didn't even used to be a concept of animate versus inanimate until relatively recent in history. So I think it seems impossible sometimes when we're dealing with the last 2,000 years, like you said. But I think remembering that it's still such a tiny sliver of history that we've been disconnected from that can help the process of trusting that it's actually right there and we're just trying to drop into it. Like, it's not like going somewhere else. It's just getting the static out of the way.
It's dialing in another station on the radio.
Yes.
Okay, psychic surgeon. That's what I'm going to call you from now on. Anything
Love
else
it.
we need to know about, at least for today?
Just the message that the journey of waking up from the matrix and waking up to soul and being integrated with soul can be profoundly and is profoundly pleasurable. It's actually like this beautiful thing where not only is it the direction that the world needs and that the universe needs, but individually it will be the thing that brings you a lot happiness, joy, and like a sense of meaningful pleasure beyond like the simple addictive pleasures that we do just to cope within the matrix. Like, it is the most pleasurable thing, so it's worth the journey even though there can be rocky moments.
Elizabeth, thanks for joining us today. Very good information on how to wake up from the matrix. In the meantime, how can our listeners find you online?
My website, bodyandsoulsanctuary.com. From there you can find my free community, Body and Soul Village, and we can talk about getting you enrolled to work with me and get some psychic surgery.
You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. In the meantime, you can find more info on closertovenus.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.